When Akhenaten became pharaoh in the year 1378 BC, he planned a religious revolution. Its aim, to establish a single all-embracing God. Akhenaten wanted worship to be limited to the sun god, an outrageous scheme in a land that had worshipped manifold deities for more than 2,000 years. How could one individual believe he could annihilate the ancient traditions at the Nile? In the 4th year of his reign, Akhenaten sent a disturbing message to Amun's high priest. The king commands the construction of a new temple to honor a minor god. It was to be the largest complex of worship ever planned in Egypt. It was to contain more than 400 sacrificial altars. It clearly dwarfed the old temple, until then Egypt's most splendid building. That the new king should even consider such a plan was scandalous. For the conservative clergy, even the bas-reliefs on the walls of the new temple were a provocation. Akhenaten's motto was truth. In a land where beauty and balance stood above all else, the royal couple was suddenly depicted as ungainly, fat, and ugly. And above it all, a god who had never before been seen in this light.
This is a traditional depiction of the Egyptian sun god, always as a human body, with the head of a falcon and the disk of the sun, and always in profile. The problem here was that only one person could be depicted opposite the god, traditionally the Egyptian pharaoh. During the Amarna era, however, both king and queen were to benefit equally from the presence of the sun god. What was revolutionary about Akhenaten was that he did completely away with the sun god's body and turned the sun disk so that both king and queen could benefit from the sun god's life sign.
Until then, only Pharaoh and the priests were allowed to officiate at religious ceremonies. Then Akhenaten decreed that a woman could henceforth officiate, his consort Nefertiti, an unforgivable violation of tradition. To the clergy, this amounted to a declaration of war on their gods, which greatly endangered continuity in Egypt. The high priest had to disobey. But Akhenaten preempted. He ordered the temple stormed and the sacred objects desecrated. He banned the ancient tradition and persecuted its adherents without mercy. His followers pursued a singular goal: destroying all images of the old gods. In even the most inaccessible places, all inscriptions were erased. The well-ordered world on the Nile was in turmoil. A revolution shook the land. Law and order broke down. Amun's priests tried desperately to save their god's icons. For the Egyptians, this was the king of gods, and Akhenaten had declared him the arch-enemy. A dark age dawned for the land on the Nile. How could it come to this? Akhenaten's father, Amenhotep III, had ruled the empire competently for almost 4 decades. But towards the end of his life, he was drawn and ailing. Power lay in the hands of his wife, Ti. Was she the key to her son's revolt? Had the course already been set during the reign of her husband? Amenhotep III had presented the gods with a lavish temple in Luxor, which was an equally generous gift to himself. his ingenious architect designed a sacred site where both the gods and Pharaoh were worshipped, a stroke of genius that brought fame and honor for the architect long after his death and assured Pharaoh of the reverence of his subjects. Elaborately ornamented burial sites testify to the prosperity of the time. It was a world of luxury and amusements. Tributary payments filled the royal vaults. Egypt had never known such wealth before. Even death appeared to have lost its dread. The dead were presented with hundreds of gifts for their final journey. Their afterlife was to be as comfortable as life on earth. Pharaoh and the clergy vouched for it. And even though their only role was to ensure the temple was kept in order, the clergy actually held secular power. They called themselves servants of the gods, but mainly served themselves. The Temple of Karnak was a mighty fortress. Within its walls alone, hundreds of priests performed service. Its treasure vaults were as full as those of Pharaoh. The country's elite frequented this temple. A powerful state within the state, with its high priest a dangerous rival to the royal court. He saw to it that the gods were favorably disposed toward the people. Egyptians were convinced that their country was doomed should this cult be discontinued. The Whitechapel of Karnak is from a time when Amun became Egypt's main god. Its paintings hold an eternal truth. Time and again they showed the king in the company of the god. The inscriptions too confirmed this magic union. God deigns Pharaoh recognition when he makes sacrificial offerings. A mutual arrangement as long as each played by the rules. And the rules said, divide and rule. However, the more influence the high priest gained, the more difficult it was for him to abide by them. More than once his predecessors had forced their will upon the king. Until then, no one had dared to rebel against the priests of the supreme god. They demonstrated their power with sacred processions. But, unnoticed by them, the revolution was already in progress. Increasingly, Amenhotep III had himself depicted at the side of Egypt's powerful gods. The most important blow Pharaoh dealt the high priest was on the latter's own turf. Like Amun, Amenhotep had himself carried to the temple of Luxor in a ceremonial litter. Here, the next humiliation awaited his rival. A statue of Pharaoh in the form of the highest-ranking god, creator of the world, who had been worshipped since time immemorial. Amenhotep had steadfastly curtailed the far-reaching powers of Amun's omnipotent priests by offering ritual sacrifices to Egypt's other gods. Amun was still worshipped as king of gods, but no longer the absolute ruler. When the old pharaoh died and the jackal-headed god of the dead had performed the funeral rites, the once all-powerful clergy had already lost their power within the state. The road to one of the most radical changes in antiquity had been mapped, and the old world was doomed. Akhenaten's reign opened a new chapter in Egyptian history. In the end, his vision would divide the country, and his idea of a singular god shake the entire world. But why this radical break with ancient traditions? Was the young king a power-hungry despot or a demented dreamer? Was his vision the product of an ingenious spirit or that of a disturbed mind? Akhenaten took possession of his parents' palace. This magnificent building was the appropriate setting for the young ruler's ambitious plans. He posed on his father's throne like a vain peacock. At his side was his mother, Tei. With brilliant artifice, Akhenaten made her his ally. This little bust from the Egyptian Museum in Berlin bears proof.
Our CAT scan examination revealed the change that took place in an important historical figure, Thea, at the instant of the death of her husband.
This CAT scan proves that Akhenaten deified his mother in the true sense of the word. Beneath the heavy wig of the queen, the headdress of a goddess appears. Even during her lifetime, the sun had elevated his mother into the heaven of gods and had thereby ensured her ongoing loyalty. And yet, Tei was no longer the most important woman at court. This position was to be assumed by a complete unknown, the mysterious Nefertiti. Her name alone was a puzzle. Translated, it means, "The beauty has arrived." Was this a clue to her origin? Did she belong to the Egyptian royal family? Was she a close relative of Akhenaten? Or was she a princess born in a foreign kingdom? Had she already lived in Amenhotep III's harem and, after his death, married Akhenaten? How extensive was Nefertiti's influence on Pharaoh? Bas-reliefs show the couple in intimate embrace. What was it that tied them so closely? Was this a perfect and flawless relationship? A dream couple? Or did this facade conceal some tragic secret? Most of the depictions show the royal couple as plump and unshapely. Huge statues show Akhenaten naked, but without so much as a hint of genitals. Or was this really a woman, Nefertiti? Red, the color symbolizing masculinity in ancient Egypt, proves that this is the king. Why then this ambiguous depiction? Did Akhenaten suffer from some disfiguring illness? Strangely, his daughters too have oddly shaped heads. we approach the problem with the help of state-of-the-art technology. The neuroradiology department of the Charité Hospital in Berlin. A team of doctors is conducting a revealing examination. An X-ray beam scans a skull, showing the same abnormal shape. The doctor's diagnosis? This person suffered from craniostosis, a genetically caused malformation of the skull. A three-dimensional image permits a journey into the inside of the misshaped skull. Clearly, the sutures of the cranium hadn't expanded since infancy. Did the pressure exerted by the growing brain drive Akhenaten to madness? His daughters suffered the same affliction. Could royal incest be the cause? This assumption led us to the nuclear lab in the maximum security zone. Dr. Mike Urban, a geneticist, researches the changes in the human genotype with the help of radioactive substances. His special interest is the genetic makeup of siblings. Would this examination reveal details of Akhenaten's fate? The analysis leads to a surprising conclusion. Each red mark represents a conformity in the genetic makeup. Dr. Urban is convinced that Akhenaten's daughters could not have avoided inheriting this genetic deficiency. This result throws a different light on the image of an intact family. Was Nefertiti more than just the loving wife of Akhenaten? Possibly a close blood relative? This could be the key to many unanswered questions. Akhenaten was possessed by a religious delusion. He used every means to promote worship of his god. For him, he even changed his name. Amenhotep IV became Akhenaten, the one useful to Aton. This is how he wanted to be revered by the world. The dark shrine in the temple must have seemed like a dungeon to him. True faith could not blossom in this environment. Akhenaten's decision was final. Amun's time had run out. His temples were closed. In Thebes, a new beginning was impossible. Far from the sites of the old gods, Akhenaten searched for a worthy site to worship the new god. In the center of his Nile empire, downstream from Thebes, he found the right place, now called Amarna. Relieved from the constraints of the past, the royal couple was keen to realize its aspirations. A holy city was to be built at this site to honor Aton. A god clearly visible to all on his daily arc of the sky. The site for the new capital was dreary and bare, but ideal for Akhenaten's plans. No deity had been worshipped before at the place where the temple for his new god was to be erected. These words were inscribed into rock face throughout a wide radius. Look on Akhenaten, which Aton wanted created as an eternal monument to his glory. In no time at all, a city, the like of which Egypt had never seen before, was built here. An enormous cultural center designed on the drawing board. Pharaoh himself supervised the survey and announced that he would stay at this place until the mountains would rise and leave, and the waters would flow upstream. The city might have looked like this, a reconstruction based on decades of excavation. Pharaoh had dedicated the largest building to his god. Glaring sunlight filled the temple. Hundreds of sacrificial altars were built in the open. According to Akhenaten, nothing was to stand in the sun god's way. He who intoxicates my eyes at his sight, his rays fill the land and enliven all things when he rises in Aton's temple in Akhenaten. Are these the words of a madman? Or was it the greatest visionary of his time who lived within these palace walls? The splendor of the throne room was unsurpassed. Starting from here, Akhenaten intended to carry his belief in one god out into the world. Tens of thousands of people were at work on the new capital. Brick walls were quickly in place, but millions of boulders had to be brought from around the country for the foundations. Work in the quarries went on continuously. The high priest was made to suffer an unprecedented humiliation. He was condemned to work in the quarries for the monuments to his arch-enemy. But Akhenaten was unable to break his belief in his own god. Akhenaten and Nefertiti high-handedly guided the fates of the people in the City of the Sun. They had reached the pinnacle of their dream and believed they were facing a glorious future. As the sun god daily crossed the sky in the belief of the Egyptians, so Akhenaten traveled his empire in his gilded chariot. Depictions in the tombs of Akhenaten indicate how much the king considered himself the sun god's equal. His chariot was everywhere. There should no longer be a distinction between Pharaoh and God in the minds of his subjects. Royal outings became more like a procession of gods. Not a scene can be found on the walls of a tomb in which the royal couple was not the center of attention. Akhenaten and Nefertiti even banished the gods of the underworld. Only then did the extent of the revolution become clear. A life in the world beyond no longer existed in Amarna. What counted now was solely the devotion to Pharaoh and the worship of the ever-present sun god. Pharaoh rewarded this loyalty with generosity. Was the people's loyalty thus bought with largesse? Or did they serve their new god in sincere belief? The courtiers enjoyed their newly acquired wealth. Life was a generous gift from Aton, and was meant to be enjoyed. The new style in art took a turn toward nature. The message was, God can be found in all creation. Music and dance were a daily delight, but a class of upstarts held sway at court. Lineage no longer mattered, only loyalty towards the royal couple. The promise of a place in society lured ever more people to the city of the sun. If the depictions are credible, the inhabitants lacked nothing. But was this reality? Egyptologists have concluded that this only served propaganda purposes.
This reconstructed piece of temple wall is 3 meters long. The scene symbolizes Aton's sunrise and how his rays awaken the animals to life. In Akhenaten's philosophy of nature, this symbolizes that the only god, Aton, is responsible for all aspects of life, and this life begins in the morning when he rises.
Dieses Leben beginnt am Morgen mit seinem Sonnenaufgang.
Akhenaten, a master of propaganda, even in his observation of nature. In 30 verses, he sang his praise to the sun god without whom nothing could exist. Were these the fantasies of a sick mind, or the work of a god king and philosopher? His influence must not be underestimated. Akhenaten's ode to the sun can be found almost verbatim in Psalm 104 of the Bible. But was Amarna really all sunshine and happiness?
The images of nature at peace and the descriptions of sacrifices must not blind us to the political realities. The king, in fact, pursued only one aim, to impose his personal power. And one way to do this was through religion. The king declared himself to be the son of the sun god, so power passed from the sun god to the king, and people had to obey him.
They had no choice. The king had monopolized religious service. Only he was able to interpret the will of Aton. There was no way around him to reach God. People had to revere Pharaoh if their prayers were to be heard. But was there really blind obedience? Why then do the bas-reliefs and paintings in Amarna depict so many soldiers and guards? Was Akhenaten's rule a time of intolerance? His land a police state? Domestic security was asserted by force. Those who complied had nothing to fear. But what became of those who did not obey unconditionally? Many were reluctant to relinquish their old-time religion. They continued praying to their old gods, even in the new capital. They sought comfort and solace from daily strife in their old gods. Despite the constant danger of discovery, they continued their sacrificial practices. An item found in the ruins in Amarna proves it.
Diese Vase des Gottes Bes dürfte es in Amarna gar nicht geben.
An urn of the god Bes should not even have existed in Amarna. The only god permitted by Akhenaten was Aton, the sun god. But alongside and ranking below him, the people of Amarna secretly continued to worship a string of their traditional gods. It couldn't have been any different. When a religious belief has grown over 1,500 years, it cannot suddenly be invalidated by decree. It simply couldn't have worked.
So how stable was Akhenaten's empire? How long can an empire exist where state doctrine is based on oppression? Akhenaten had vested himself with omnipotence. Didn't he then have to fear envy and betrayal from all quarters? His subjects sang his praises. You are the image of the living Aton. But what really went on in their minds? Akhenaten may not have given a passing thought to this question. He demanded to be worshipped like an enraptured image of God. Unattainable, and therefore doomed to failure? Nothing remains of the 50,000 people who once lived on the barren plain of Tel El Amarna. The Sun City has been gone for thousands of years. Akhenaten's name, too, was erased from the annals. It wasn't until the middle of the 19th century that word about a mysterious pharaoh reached Europe. The scholar Richard Lepsius uncovered a first clue. In 1842, he began to document Egypt's art treasures. As head of a Royal Prussian expedition, he traveled through the land on the Nile. In his diaries are reports of monumental bas-reliefs in rocks and grave sites in central Egypt, which are decorated in very unusual style. The mysterious pharaoh is said to have been their builder. A boundary post hinted at a huge city with not a trace of a ruin anywhere. But the city that had existed was covered by the sands of millennia. In the early 1900s, another German expedition arrived in Amarna. The area was systematically excavated and the finds were archived. Valuable discoveries were made during the excavation of a sculptor's workshop. Many statues were very well preserved. This discovery gave reason to hope, since earlier finds had more or less been fragmentary. It became obvious that the entire inventory of the city had been willfully destroyed. An archaeological sensation occurred on December 6, 1912. The workers alarmed the head of the excavation, Ludwig Borchardt, in great excitement. Carefully, he unearthed a breathtaking discovery. In his excavation diary, he noted laconically, "Description pointless, must be seen." Never before had he seen anything like this. Small wonder that the people of Akhenaten had worshipped Nefertiti as a goddess. Was this also the reason why nothing was known of her origin? Were her parents never mentioned because a goddess could not be descendant of mortals? But despite extensive investigations, scholars could find no clue to her past. Might she have come to Egypt from abroad? Was she the bearer of the revolutionary monotheistic belief? Was Akhenaten but a tool in the hands of this beguiling woman? Today we know that many princesses from the Mideast lived in Pharaoh's harems. Political marriages were made to pacify war-hungry northerners. Between the Babylonians and the Hittites lay the Mitannian Empire. Is this where Nefertiti's origins lay? Mitanni was forgotten, but an accidental find by a peasant's wife in 1887 was to prove very significant. Among the ruins of Amarna, she had chanced upon clay slabs bearing strange characters. Had this unsuspecting woman discovered a treasure, or was it merely rubble? A neighbor, suspecting a good deal, bought the slabs for a handful of coins. But neither art dealers nor scholars seemed interested. Cuneiform in Egypt? Clearly, this had to be a clumsy fake. No one recognized the true value of these slabs. It proved to be Pharaoh's almost complete correspondence with other powerful rulers of the world. Could this finally be a clue to Akhenaten's true character? If reports from foreign envoys are credible, the image of a mad visionary emerges once again. One letter from Babylon is a complaint that Pharaoh kept envoys waiting in the blazing sun until they dropped of exhaustion and died. a clear indication that Akhenaten completely neglected his foreign policy. But not a single sign could be found that Nefertiti was of foreign origin. During the 13th year of Akhenaten's reign, the queen vanished from public life. From this time on, her name was never again used officially. Had she fallen from grace? The storeroom of the Egyptian Museum in Berlin. Here, part of the finds from the German excavation in Amarna is kept. Professor Wildung is searching for evidence of Nefertiti's ostracism. Thousands of fragments are proof that an entire epoch had been violently erased. Among the fragments was Nefertiti's sensual mouth. What's important is the question, when and why was the statue destroyed? The queen spent her final years separated from Akhenaten. Had he banished her? This is unthinkable, since Nefertiti was a part of his religious concept for which there was no substitute. There is, in fact, evidence of her peaceful demise and noble burial.
Den einzigen Beweis für eine Bestattung der Nofretete liefern diese zwei Bruchstücke.
These two fragments from the death statue of the queen are the only evidence of the burial of Nefertiti. And we can prove that, although the parts don't directly fit, together with this middle part, which I had cast, these fragments could well belong together. And the inscription reads, "The great princess of the palace, the one praised by Akhenaten, the great royal consort Nefertiti, may she live forever." And this proves that Nefertiti was indeed buried, nobly and fully titled, and not as the outcast she was assumed to be for a long time.
This noble burial can only have taken place at the king's crypt in Amarna. According to Akhenaten's orders, the entire family was to be entombed here. But parts of the walls are only roughly hewn, and a large part of the embellishment is missing. Obviously, the crypt was never completed. The walls of a side chamber show remnants of a large bas-relief. The inscriptions and paintings indicate deep grief for the death of their second daughter, whom Akhenaten and Nefertiti had entombed here. Her death must have come as a great shock. Not even Aton had been able to spare the royal family this grief. The king's burial chamber. Had its walls never been decorated? The fragment of a sun disk is proof to the contrary. But nowhere is there a trace of the royal couple. In the middle of the room, an empty stone pedestal. This is where Akhenaten's sarcophagus was to be placed. Could it be that Pharaoh and his queen were not entombed in Akhenaten? Fragments of tomb furnishings were found among the rubble of the royal wadi, willfully destroyed and broken into tiny pieces. But there was not a trace of the mummies. Had loyal courtiers been able to spirit the bodies to safety? The Valley of the Kings in Thebes. We're accompanying Dr. Nazri Iskander. The archaeologist is a specialist on the mummies of ancient Egypt. His goal is the tomb of Pharaoh Amenhotep II. 100 years ago, scientists made a sensational find here. In the burial chamber, they found the mummies of the most famous pharaohs of the New Kingdom. But what secret lies behind the sealed side chamber? By opening it, the scientist hopes that more information about a dark chapter in the era of the pharaohs will be revealed. He hopes to solve the secret of the missing mummies. Iskander makes a sensational discovery. Behind the wall is a hiding place for mummies. Has the archaeologist reached his goal at last? The mummies are badly destroyed. Traces of violence are everywhere. Are they the result of careless embalming or the work of grave robbers? Dr. Iskander is convinced that the mummies originate from the time when the land on the Nile was reigned by the emperor who entered Egyptian history as the heretic. The best preserved mummy is a female. Could it be that of Queen Tiye? But examinations prove that this mummified woman had died at the age of around 35 years. Tiye must have been more than 50 when she died. Dr. Iskander ventures a bold speculation. Could this be the mummy of Nefertiti herself? But where was Akhenaten? In 1907, the American amateur archaeologist Theodore Davis made a sensational discovery in the Valley of the Kings. He found remains of mysterious tomb furnishings in an inconspicuous tomb. Fragments of a tomb bearing the name of Queen Tiye, magic tiles with Akhenaten's cartouche, and a golden sarcophagus containing a royal mummy. Was this the mummy of the heretic? The priest had made a neat excision of the pharaoh's golden face mask. No one was to identify this king. The cartouche bearing his name was also destroyed. In his mummy lab in Cairo, Dr. Iskander compares the X-ray image of the unknown king with that of Tutankhamun. Both skulls show so much conformity that they can only be closely related, possibly father and son. Are they Tutankhamun and Akhenaten? But the mysterious body had died at 20, which was too young for Akhenaten. Another mummy has been kept at the laboratory for years. Inscriptions identify it as being that of Amenhotep or Amenophis III. But the scientist has his doubts. A comparison of this skull with that of his alleged father had been negative. The skull is much too large, impossible for a relative.
Program in the computer about the similarity.
Does this cabinet contain an archaeological sensation?
But we don't know, maybe this was replaced, or the name which was written on the coffin, on that mummy, was not clear. We are not sure anyway of this, that this is really the Amenophis III, maybe an Amenophis IV.
Might the unthinkable be possible after all? Has Akhenaten's mummy really escaped the destructive rage of his enemies? Who might have ordered the rescue of the heretic king? There was only one possibility. The only pharaoh whose tomb furnishings survived intact for thousands of years, since looters knew nothing about him, was Tutankhamun. His tomb is proof that he returned to worshipping the former gods. However, he too was ostracized like his father Akhenaten. Tutankhamun died at the early age of 20. Did he die by accident, or was he murdered because he had given orders to rescue his father's mummy? Although the young pharaoh and his sibling wife left Akhenaton's sun city and returned to worshipping the old gods, they're depicted on a throne beneath the rays of Aton. Did Tutankhamun have to die because he and his wife had clung to their father's religion? The tomb of his successor, Ai, lies in the western valley of Thebes. He had married young Tutankhamun's widow and ascended the throne himself. In his tomb, not a trace can be found of any belief in the sun god of the heretic. But here too the iconoclasts had been at work. Large sections of the wall decoration are missing. Searching here for the image of the king or even his name is futile. Once again, Amun had been restored as the king of gods, and under his patronage, the new emperor, Horemheb, erased the memory of the kings of the Amarna period. Horemheb had huge buildings for Amun erected in Karnak and used every last brick of masonry from the Aton temple as filling material. Reconstructing these temple walls is an almost futile assignment for the archaeologists. Akhenaton's vision of a monotheistic religion had failed. After his death, he reaped the violence he had sown throughout his lifetime. His memory was mercilessly eradicated. None of his images was to survive for posterity. The servants in the Aton temples had fled. Even Akhenaton's god faded to oblivion. But the concept of monotheism lived on. In time, Akhenaton's vision of a single god was to spread throughout the entire world.